In 2021, if you asked a Georgian Dream supporter and an opposition supporter what they thought about NGOs, you'd likely get similar answers. Fast forward to today, and the same question reveals a starkly different reality. Many government supporters now view these organizations with deep suspicion, while opposition supporters have become their ardent defenders. This shift represents more than just changing opinions. It illustrates a fundamental distinction in how political polarization manifests. While Georgians may not feel personal animosity toward their political opponents, they increasingly disagree on core issues of governance and civil society. So, what's driving these different types of polarization? And what does it mean for Georgian democracy? Welcome to the CRRC-Georgia podcast. Today, we're examining the phenomenon of political polarization in the Georgian context and important distinctions and nuances to be considered regarding polarization. Drawing from our survey data collected from August to September 2022 and published in CRRC-Georgia researcher Givi Selagadze's 2023 report, Partisanship and Effective Polarization in Georgia, as well as our 2024 Caucasus Barometer findings, we'll explore two distinct types of polarization, affective and ideological, and their very different impacts on Georgian society. Political scientists distinguish between two primary forms of polarization. Affective polarization refers to the emotional distance between political groups, how much partisans dislike or distrust supporters of opposing parties as people. This is about feelings towards the other side, regardless of policy positions. Ideological polarization, on the other hand, involves genuine disagreements over policy, values, and the proper role of institutions in society. This type of polarization reflects substantive differences in how people believe the country should be governed. Understanding this distinction is crucial because each type poses different challenges to democratic governance and requires different solutions. Before examining our findings, let's discuss how we measured these different forms of polarization. CRC Georgia conducted a nationally representative phone survey in August to September 2022 with 1,523 interviews of adult Georgian citizens. The survey was conducted in Georgian, Armenian, Azerbaijani, and Russian languages and was complemented by a focus group discussion with participants from various political affiliations in different regions of Georgia. To measure affective polarization, we utilized two distinct approaches. First, we examined performance perceptions by asking respondents, how often does the ruling party do what the country needs? And on the other hand, how often does the opposition do what the country needs? These questions allowed us to construct a polarization variable where respondents who assess both political poles similarly show no polarization, while those with contrasting assessments demonstrate greater polarization. Second, we measured social distance by asking about comfort levels with friends who support different political camps. The logic is that if effective polarization is present, partisans should feel less comfortable with friends who support opposing parties compared to non affiliated voters. Our 2022 survey reveals a fascinating picture of affective polarization in Georgian society. When examining performance perceptions, we found that almost a third, 31%, of the public can be categorized as somewhat polarized. These are respondents who said one of the two political camps rarely or never do what the country needs, while claiming that the other political camp often or always does what the country needs. However, the social distance measures revealed much lower levels of polarization. An overwhelming majority of Georgians report feeling comfortable with friends who support opposing parties. Only 12% of Georgian Dream supporters said they would feel less comfortable or very uncomfortable with an opposition supporter friend, while just 7% of non affiliated voters reported the same. Similarly, 18% of opposition supporters said they would feel less comfortable with a Georgian Dream supporter friend compared to 6% of non affiliated voters. This finding is particularly significant because it suggests that while Georgians may have strong opinions about political performance, they maintain personal relationships across party lines. This represents an important reservoir of social trust that could serve as a foundation for democratic resilience. Demographic patterns reveal important insights about who is most likely to experience affective polarization. Our regression analysis shows that age is a significant predictor. More polarized people tend to be older. Ethnicity also plays a role, with ethnic Georgians more likely to be polarized than ethnic minorities. Religious attendance emerges as another important factor. People who attend religious services at least once a week tend to be more polarized than others. Interestingly, while frequent religious attendance correlates with polarization, frequency of praying does not show the same relationship. suggesting that social religious participation rather than private religiosity drives polarization. Sex, education level, settlement type, employment status, and frequency of praying show no significant relationship with polarization levels. The most powerful predictors are partisan identity and media consumption patterns. Partisans, both Georgian Dream and opposition supporters, demonstrate significantly higher polarization rates than non affiliated voters. Among the partisan groups, Georgian Dream supporters show the highest polarization rates, more likely to be polarized than not only non affiliated voters, but opposition supporters as well. But Georgia also experiences a different, arguably more concerning type of polarization. The transformation of attitudes toward non governmental organizations, NGOs, provides a clear example of ideological polarization, where partisan groups develop fundamentally different views about the proper role and legitimacy of civil society institutions. Our data tells a compelling story about how ideological divides can emerge around specific policy areas. According to our 2024 Caucasus Barometer, 32% of the public now reports distrusting the NGO sector, up from 23% in 2021. The ideological nature of this polarization becomes clear when we examine attitudes by party affiliation. In 2021, distrust and trust toward NGOs was roughly equivalent among both Georgian Dream and opposition supporters. By 2024, however, these attitudes had developed a distinctly ideological character. Among Georgian Dream supporters, distrust grew from 25% to 39%. Among opposition supporters, trust increased from 24% to 38%. Those who do not support any party did not experience a similar attitude shift, suggesting that changing attitudes toward NGOs are driven by partisan ideological messaging rather than the organization's actual performance. This represents a fundamental disagreement about the role of civil society in Georgian democracy, not just dislike of political opponents, but genuine ideological differences about how society should be organized. Conspiracy theories around NGOs range from accusations of corruption, the classic framing of their workers as grantis chamelebi or grant eaters, to more extreme accusations of the sector engaging in spying and even attempting to organize coups. Meanwhile, the opposite camp views NGOs as defenders of civil society and active promoters of democracy and economic development. These aren't just different preferences, they represent fundamentally different worldviews about the legitimacy and proper role of civil society organizations. Media consumption patterns also reinforces ideological polarization. Between 2021 and 2024, distrust of NGOs among viewers of pro-government channels, Imedi TV, Post TV, and Rustavi Ori, more than doubled from 20% to 41%. Conversely, trust in NGOs nearly doubled among viewers of Formula, Tavariarchi, and TV Pirveli, increasing from 21% to 39%. The NGO case study provides crucial insights into how ideological polarization differs from affective polarization. While affective polarization appears to be relatively contained in Georgia, ideological polarization around civil society has been deliberately cultivated through sustained political campaigns. Georgian Dream's messaging against civil society organizations appears remarkably effective at changing fundamental beliefs about these institutions among the party's supporters while failing to persuade opposition supporters or nonpartisans. This demonstrates how ideological polarization can be weaponized to undermine democratic institutions by reframing them as illegitimate rather than simply partisan. Unlike affective polarization, which is primarily about emotions and personal relationships, ideological polarization reshapes citizens' understanding of how democracy should function. This makes it potentially more dangerous to democratic institutions as it challenges the legitimacy of entire sectors rather than just creating distance between political opponents. These findings have important implications for understanding the dual nature of polarization in Georgia. The concentration of affective polarization among older, more religious, and partisan segments of society suggests that this form of polarization may be manageable given the low levels of social distance we observe. However, the ideological polarization around civil society represents a more serious challenge. Our research shows that this type of polarization has led to diverging fundamental beliefs about the role of NGOs in Georgian democracy, creating competing visions of how civil society should function. The distinction between these two types of polarization offers both hope and concern. On the hopeful side, Georgia's low levels of affective polarization suggest that society retains important reservoirs of social trust. Georgians can maintain friendships across party lines, which could serve as a foundation for democratic resilience. However, the trajectory of ideological polarization is concerning. The systematic campaign against civil society organizations, culminating in the passage of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, represents a deliberate strategy to create competing ideologies around institutions that until recently enjoyed broad legitimacy across party lines. For international actors, particularly the European Union, these findings suggest that addressing polarization requires understanding both its affective and ideological dimensions. While programs promoting cross party dialogue might address affective polarization, countering ideological polarization requires defending the legitimacy of democratic institutions themselves. For Georgia's political actors and NGOs, these findings suggest different interventions for different types of polarization. While interpersonal contact across party lines might address affective polarization, countering ideological polarization requires defending fundamental democratic principles and institutional legitimacy. In conclusion, our research reveals that political polarization in Georgia operates on two distinct levels. While affective polarization, emotional distance between political opponents, remains relatively contained, ideological polarization around civil society has grown substantially and strategically. The case of NGO attitudes illustrates how effectively government led campaigns can transform fundamental beliefs about democratic institutions, creating competing ideologies rather than simply partisan preferences. Understanding this distinction is crucial for both Georgian politicians and international observers seeking to support democratic development. The challenge ahead is addressing ideological polarization while preserving the social trust that limits affective polarization. Georgia's ability to maintain personal relationships across political divides provides a foundation for democratic resilience, but only if the country can prevent further erosion of consensus around basic democratic institutions. For detailed methodology and these report findings, you can check out our website, crrc.ge. Thank you for joining us on the CRRC Georgia podcast. Until next time.